The CIO political action. It's over the door, I think. Roger, are you ready for me to go now? Okay. Alrighty. This is a film strip produced by the CIO Political Action Committee to acquaint the leaders, the officers, the shop steward, the members of our local union political action committees with the reasons National CIO PAC conducts a dollar contributions drive, a voluntary dollar to PAC drive in every local every year. Now, the folks who are going to solicit the dollars, when they talk to their fellow CIO members about giving the dollar, need to know, and they want to know, why the CIO member is asked to give a dollar and why he ought to want to give a dollar. The title of this film strip is Everybody Gives to Political Action, and you have to give to political action either voluntarily or involuntarily. If you make an involuntary contribution, you're going to give a whole lot more than a dollar. Now, CIO PAC asks for a voluntary dollar, and it only costs you $1. Now we move into the first frame. Here you see a worker, a CIO member, who is confident he's got the protection of a good CIO contract. And here we talk about wages and hours and seniority, our grievance procedure, how we settle grievances, our guaranteed annual wage program. Now, this is your union program. This is what we negotiate in our collective bargaining contracts. We organize a good, strong union. We have the help of our international union representatives and officers. We have the help of a national CIO and all of the unions that make up CIO. And with a good, strong union in our collective bargaining negotiations, we are able to get the employer that we work for to agree to a contract that provides for wages and hours that we will be paid and the hours we will work, and the kind of seniority program we will have, how we're going to go about settling our grievances. And as you know, of course, CIO is now very much interested in a guaranteed annual wage program. But that's your union program, and that's what you get in collective bargaining. Now let's talk just a moment about political action. You know, political action is mighty important. A lot of folks think, well, we ought not to discuss political action in our union. We ought to leave political action out just like we'd leave religion out. But we can't very well do that, and this is why. Here is our next frame. You know, everything that we have negotiated in our contracts, our wages and hours, our seniority, grievance procedure, our pension program, our insurance program, whatever we've negotiated can be legislated out of existence. Our state legislature can pass a law and say it will be illegal for a union to even ask an employer for this or that or the other. Now, the members of our state legislature are elected just like anybody else is elected to public office. And they decide on what kind of laws we're going to have. Up in Washington, you might want to say down in Washington here, Henry. Up in Washington, the members of Congress can pass a law outlawing any part of our union contract. Remember Taft-Hartley. The Taft-Hartley law said that a union could not even ask the employer for a union shop clause until first a majority of all the eligible workers in a plant had authorized the union to make that demand upon the employer in a secret labor board election. Now, even though the unions voted overwhelmingly for the union shop, that didn't mean that the boss had to give it to you. that just gave your union representative the right to ask for it. But the Taft-Hartley law also provided that if in a given state the union shop was illegal, the labor board wouldn't even hold an election in that state to determine whether or not the union representatives could ask for the union shop. It was just illegal no matter what. And so whatever we have gained in legislation or whatever we've gained in collective bargaining can be legislated out of existence. Now, what can we get through political action and legislation? Well, let's look at our security program. Let's look at our legislative program. All of us know about our Social Security laws. How did the Social Security law come into existence? Well, it was passed in 1936 in Congress. It went into effect January 1st, 1937. Now, that was a law passed by the Congress of the United States. There's a lot of talk now about changing the Social Security law. There's a lot of talk about doing away with a Social Security fund of more than $18 billion, half of which was contributed by the workers of this country, who are covered by the Social Security law as it stands today. But our Social Security law is a law that was passed by the Congress in 1936. It has been amended 2 or 3 times since then. But don't let anybody kid you. The Social Security law that you think now you have a vested right in can be repealed. The Congress of the United States, the people we elect, all of us throughout the 48 states and our possessions, the Social Security law can be just repealed, and we won't have Social Security anymore. All Congress has got to do is pass a law saying we won't have any more Social Security. Now, we've got a 75-cent minimum wage at this time, and the CIO is asking for $1.25 minimum wage. That's something that the Congress of the United States can do. The Congress of the United States can increase the minimum wage from 75 cents, where it stands now, up to 90 cents or $1.25. We think we're entitled to $1.25, and that's what we're asking Congress to do. But it's the members of Congress who have the final decision, and they've got to decide. Now, yeah, they can cut the minimum. You remember that originally the wage and hour minimum in the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was passed in 1938, provided for 25 cents an hour minimum at the beginning, and that was in effect for a year. And it wasn't until several years later that the automatic 40 cents minimum became effective. And the 75 cents we've now got came about as a result of an amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act, raising the minimum from 40 cents to 75 cents. Now, they can drop back down. They might want to say, well, we got to control inflation, or we got to control deflation, or some other excuse, but they can lower your 75-cent minimum wage, or they can raise up to $1.25 like we want. Now, that's what Congress can do. Over in the state legislature, at the state capitol, the members of the state legislature passed the laws that govern the amount of unemployment compensation we will have if we are unemployed. They decide what kind of a workman's compensation law we will have. And in terms of our broad tax program, the state legislature decides upon taxes, and so does the Congress of the United States. So our taxes we're affected in tax terms by what Congress does, by what the state legislature does, by what the county court decision is, and by what the city governing body decides, whether it's a city council or board of aldermen or what have you. But our taxes are decided by people that get elected to office. Now, let's go to Social Security. Let's talk about Social Security for a minute. Social Security can mean, it's possible under the present law that a person who is covered by the Social Security law can get a total amount of $46,000 in benefits. Now, that is the absolute maximum We don't know of anybody yet that has gotten it. Nobody, I suppose, could have gotten it because not enough years have passed since the law went into effect. But it's possible under the present law for our Social Security to provide $46,000 maximum benefits to one worker and his wife and his children and the family. But most of us, of course, not even thinking about $46,000, but it just shows you what is possible. And we have here the arrangement which shows the procedure, the circumstances, which makes it possible under the law for one family to get $46,000 in Social Security benefits. And the Congress of the United States now is talking about changing that law. Let's look at workman's compensation here. You know, there's a lot of talk about every time we go on strike, they say, these are man days lost. If you have 100 workers on strike for one day, they say, there's 100 man days lost, and the strike is therefore bad. If you have 1,000 workers go on strike for a week, well, that's 1,000 man days lost for the first day, and at the end of the week, why, it's 5,000 man days lost. And they say that is bad. That is terrible. We ought not to tolerate. Strikes are bad because we've lost all those man days of work. Now let's look. In 1951, the total number of man days lost through all of the strikes in the United States was 23 million man days. All the strikes we had in the country, we lost 23 million man days of work. But let's see how many man days of work were lost by injuries. And on the job, injuries that workers have sustained on the job. Injuries that were compensable under the Workmen's Compensation Law. 1,200 million man days. Now compare that with the number of days we lost on strike, the number of days that were lost because of injuries. And it shows you the importance of workmen's compensation. Now, workmen's compensation laws are different. We haven't got a one that's like another. Every single one of the workmen's compensation laws in this country is different from the other. Now, CIO is asking, as we show in this next frame, CIO is asking for an overall federal program. We want uniform benefits. Look here, for example, that if a worker in Kansas gets killed on the job, the most that his wife or widow or survivors can expect, the most that law provides in the state of Kansas is that $6,000 will be paid. Here's a worker on a job, covered by workman's compensation, gets killed, all that can be expected by his survivors is $6,000. Now, in the state of Tennessee, I guess they figure that a worker's worth just a little bit more than $6,000 if he gets killed. So they pay $8,500 in Tennessee. Out in Oklahoma, man gets killed, it's $13,500. Now, why is it worth more to a widow and the kids in Oklahoma if a worker gets killed than it is in Kansas? But that shows you the difference in the laws that we have, 48 different laws. Now, CIO is asking for an overall federal program providing for uniform benefits and workmen's compensation. And remember that the state legislature decides what we're going to have now in the present law. And the Congress of the United States could, if it wanted to, the Congress could pass a uniform workmen's compensation law. Now let's look at unemployment compensation. And here we have the same thing. We got 48 different workmen's compensation laws in 48 different states. Now CIO is asking for 30 weeks maximum benefits on the first unemployed stretch. We want benefits of $45 to $65. How many dollars do you draw now for how many weeks if you get unemployed? Suppose tomorrow you got laid off. Who knows just how much you get in Tennessee for how long? Okay, now that's 22 weeks you draw, and you couldn't draw but a maximum of $26. Well, over in North Carolina, you can get $30 for 26 weeks. Even though you're working in the same sort of a job and the employer pays the same kind of taxes, and it's just a different law. It provides for different benefits. Now, you remember when the Workmen's Compensation Law was passed originally, the Congress of the United States passed a law called the Wagner-Peiser Act. And it provided that every state, in order to qualify for a certain amount of federal money to be used in each state in the unemployment compensation program, that state would have to pass a law providing for certain specified minimum. You remember that in the first law we had in this state, if you were out of work because of a strike, you could still draw unemployment compensation benefits. You could still draw. And you'll also remember that it was $16 for 16 weeks. Now, that was the minimum prescribed by the federal Congress in 1936. Most states call special sessions of the legislature, but they passed the law. And they said everybody will have maximum of $16 a week for 16 weeks if you get unemployed. Now, $16 back in 1936 was supposed to be about half of the average wage that was paid. In other words, if you got out of work, well, you could expect about half as much money in unemployment compensation benefits as you would have made if you had worked full time. But look at what's happened since then. Now, in this state, $26 for 22 weeks is all you can possibly draw, and $26 is nowhere near half now what the average wage is. Like it used to be, $16 was half of what the average wage was. So the benefits should be increased. Now you notice another thing. They have amended these different state unemployment compensation laws so many times in so many states till you can be disqualified now for just about anything. One of the things is that there's only 2 states left in the country that provide for payment of unemployment compensation benefits to workers who are on strike. Just 2. The workers in the other 46 states, if they go on strike, they do not get and cannot expect any benefits in the way of unemployment compensation. That was decided by these different legislatures.
What are those 2 states?
New York and Rhode Island. Now, we've got our own program. We want 30 weeks maximum compensation. We want $45 maximum for a single worker, and if he's got a wife and if he's got kids, it takes more, and therefore we want the schedule of benefits to go on up to provide for a $65 maximum per week for a worker who's unemployed for 30 weeks. We think we're entitled to that, but that is decided by the people that get elected. The laws are made by the lawmakers, and in our political action program, we decide who the lawmakers are going to be. Now, big business knows that, and we want to talk now about the big business political action program. Big business, you know, they're pretty smart. They know what they're doing. Let's look at the big business. Now, here you see Mr. Big Business. Well, one of the things that they want to do is to shift the tax burden. They want to shift the tax burden off of those who are most able to pay onto the backs of the workers and the people who are least able to pay. You see, if they can get the people who make the laws to pass laws that will shift the tax burden from those most able to pay to those least able to pay, then big business will profit by it because they won't have to pay as much taxes. We'll have to pay more. So they give to political action in order to bring that about. Let's look at Tidelands Oil. Tidelands Oil was a big business program. Labor opposed it, you remember. The Democratic administration opposed it. Truman vetoed the law. The Supreme Court of the United States had said on 3 different occasions, when it had the matter up before it, that the Tidelands Oil belonged to all of the people throughout the 48 states and the possessions. But big business says, no, we want Tidelands oil. We want the royalties, and we're not going to give them to all the people. So they got a law passed. Now, that's already in effect. Higher interest rates. Now, who gains when they get higher interest rates? You don't lend any money, so therefore you don't get any more out of it, do you? But the banking institutions, the investment companies, the big insurance companies, they gain, and they understand this. See, that's part of their program, higher interest rates. Who pays them? Us people who borrow money, us people who buy on installment plan. So that is part of big business's program. Then look at TVA. You remember before the election, they said they weren't going to bother TVA. But since the election, the president has said that it's creeping socialism. And a fellow named Mannion, who's the dean of law school, used to be out at Notre Dame, Mannion has been appointed chairman of a commission that's making a study, and he says that TVA ought to be sold to the private power companies. And of course, Taft-Hartley was a part of big business's program because it helped to cripple labor. So you see, big business realizes the importance of political action, and they also understand the importance of making their contributions so that they can elect the kind of lawmakers who will pass the kind of laws that they want. Well, what's happened since big business sort of come into power? It's said now that in Washington we've got a big business administration. That we've got General Eisenhower as the president. We've got General Motors and General Mills and General Foods and General Electric, and well, in any case, it all adds up to big business. Now here, let's look at this frame. You see this? Here was a House, this is up in Washington, the House of Representatives. Have different committees, you know. Now the House committee, it says here on this newspaper headline, a House committee on Commerce is going to investigate the price increases which took place in the price of gasoline. Now maybe you think, well, that's nothing to be bothered about it, but that's a part of big business program. Don't let anybody tell you different. You remember in June of 1953, June of 53, every oil company simultaneously, every oil company in the country increased the price of gas 1 cent a gallon. Well, what does that mean to you? How many of you, I want to know, all of you raise your hands now that own an automobile. How many of you drive cars? Well, I see most every hand here is up. Okay. Now, would you say that, how many gallons of gas would you buy? Anybody buy 2 cents, 2 gallons a week? Everybody buys 2 gallons, I see. Well, anybody buy 5? Most everybody buys 5. Well, I see a couple of boys say they buy 10 and got both hands up. Okay. But let's just talk about, you know, CIO asks for $1, a dollar contribution, just one. We just ask for $1 from every CIO member every year to political action. A voluntary contribution. Well, now, if you own a car, brother, you're going to give involuntarily more than $1, even if you just buy 2 gallons of gas a week. Because if you buy 2 gallons of gas a week, that's 52 weeks in a year. That's $1.04 political action contribution you are involuntarily making to the oil companies. Well, you say they can't do that. It's against the law. Sure. Now, the House Committee on Commerce that investigated this increase, they never did do anything about it. It's still in effect, you know. You see, you can have a good law on the books. The people, you know, that pass the laws can pass a good law. But then if that law is not enforced, well, it may as well not have the law. And that's what we've got in this situation. You see, the Attorney General of the United States, in this case, is Mr. Brownell. But Mr. Brownell just didn't prosecute the oil companies for violating the antitrust laws, which they violated when they did this all together. So if you buy 5 gallons a week, those of you that buy 5 gallons of gas a week now make $2.60 political action contribution, just on the extra price you pay for gas. And you make it to the oil companies. You don't give it to CIOPAC. And when you give $2.60 extra, involuntary political action contribution to the oil companies, you're giving them more money to get elected their kind of lawmakers instead of your kind. something you ought to think about. You ought to think about whether it's cheaper to give your dollar and elect the right kind of lawmakers, or hold your dollar and let the oil companies and others come along and take more than a dollar to elect more of their kind of people to provide less for you and more for them. Well, what else have they got in mind? Here's the big steal. The big steal. Tidelands Oil is just one of the things. We're going to talk about Tidelands Oil in a minute. But Tidelands Oil they've already got that part of their program. Now, what else do they want? Well, they're asking for the royalties from the Outer Continental Shelf. The Outer Continental Shelf. Now, that is beyond the 3-mile limit in California and Louisiana, and in Texas, I think it's about 10.5 miles. But everything beyond that is the Outer Continental Shelf. Now they want they're going to pass another bill. They'd like to get more legislation, sort of like Tidelands Oil, that gives them the royalties on the Outer Continental Shelf. And they want mineral rights. You know, they want the mineral rights on the lands that we've got out in the west and the Rockies. They are asking for the government to just turn over to the mining companies and all of them, all of the mineral rights and the grazing lands. Now, the grazing lands, maybe you don't understand that, maybe you do, but the grazing lands out there, the big cattle ranchers want the grazing lands that are now in a part of the land that the government owns. You see, the big ranchers have already used up all of their land. They haven't taken any care of it. They haven't cultivated it properly. They have put too many cattle on it. They haven't taken care of it, and we're seeing a situation sort of like the Dust Bowl back in the early 30s. You remember the Okies and the great migration of people from out in the Midwestern states out to California, because the grass had been eaten off of all the land, and the winds blew, dust piled up, and the land could not renew itself. Now, but the government of the United States, its grazing lands, they have taken care of. You see, the government did not exploit the lands like the big cattle ranchers have done. Now what they're asking is, and they're trying to get it. They're trying to get the Congress to pass a law that will give to the Department of Interior, which controls these lands. The big cattle rancher will turn over to the government the same amount of land that is no longer any good to the rancher. In turn, the government will give him these grazing lands which have been taken care of. And that goes for timber rights, too. I could talk about that. Now, let's look at Tidelands Oil just a minute here. What did CIO and what did the progressives in this country, what did the liberal people want instead of Tidelands Oil? Well, we had the Hill Bill for Education. The Hill Bill for Education. That meant that in one state, for example, and you had one state, for example, Tennessee, the Hill Bill for Education would have given, in the next 30 years, $196 million to the state of Tennessee for educational purposes. That's over $65 apiece for every man, woman, and child. Well, we didn't get the Hill Bill for Education. They got Tidelands Oil. So the people of Tennessee and the people of all the other states are not going to get the benefits of the Hill Bill for Education out of Tidelands Oil. And now let's look at TVA. Here is TVA. What is TVA really meant? Now, Mr. Eisenhower says that it's got to go because it's creeping socialism. We don't want anything like that in this country. Now, there are a lot of people outside the TVA area who don't understand what TVA has meant. TVA has, in terms of power, has been a national yardstick. The best, most conservative estimates, and these are accurate figures, show that if the average domestic consumer of electricity today has a $5 bill a month, that's $60 a year. But if it had not been for TVA, which has caused the power companies to keep their rates lower than they would except for TVA, that average domestic consumer who pays $5 a month and $60 a year for electricity would be paying $36 a year more. Now that's $36 that TVA has saved every domestic consumer outside of the TVA area in this country. That's something to remember when you're asked to give $1 PAC voluntarily, because if they get TVA and the private power companies, brother, look out that you won't be paying $36 or more electric utility bill to the power companies involuntarily, and they know it. That's why they call it socialism, any kind of a bad name. But TVA has meant more than that. TVA has meant flood control, all throughout the Tennessee Valley, which covers several states. Flood control has meant that we don't have any more of the disastrous floods that we used to have. Out in Missouri, just a couple of years ago, we had all through the Missouri River Valley, we had floods, millions and millions and millions of dollars of damage done. And the Congress of the United States appropriated many millions of dollars to help the people out there. If they had had a Missouri Valley Authority, they wouldn't have had the floods, and the Congress would not have had to appropriate those millions of dollars to help them. Now, some people say that TVA is a tax liability. Facts are that TVA pays back to the United States government every dime that's appropriated for TVA plus 6% interest. On top of that, TVA in all of the areas where it has power lines and property pays to the government in lieu of taxes actually more than it would have to pay, or the private power companies would pay if they owned the same land in Texas. TVA has meant another thing. It's meant over $9 billion worth of purchases outside the TVA area that would not have been purchased except for the fact that we had TVA power in the TVA region. That's dynamos, and that's concrete that went into dams. It's electric appliances, washing machines, refrigerators, things that we have bought that are made in other parts of the country that we would not have bought, would not be buying, except for TVA. And TVA has meant cheaper navigation.